Welcome back to the Seed Time and Harvest Garden. So here we are, and in this episode we're going to show you how to feed the garden with fertilizer. Of course, we're not going to use synthetic fertilizer, so we're going to show you some organic fertilizers. We're going to talk about the difference also in this video. Alright, so here we have azomite clay, also known as rock dust, and this is used to add nutrients to your soil. Now, conventional fertilizers have what is known as NPK, which is nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium, and this is usually all they have, but we want to add more than that, and so we have azomite or rock dust. Next we have C90. This has 90 nutrients that are found in the sea, and we use this to enrich the soil. So we add the azomite and the C90 into our soil mixture for our organic fertilizer. Alright, next we have alfalfa meal. Now, alfalfa meal is vital for adding nitrogen and potassium to our mixture, and this is the NPK formula. So it's missing the phosphorus, but it has the nitrogen and potassium. This is a slow releasing fertilizer. It is organic, it is slow releasing, so it does not work as quickly. However, over time it does work more effective. What is the difference between organic and synthetic fertilizers? The main difference is that the synthetic fertilizers, where they will add the nutrients, they will then deplete the soil, and so it will not enrich or have you allow you to have rich soil. It will deplete the soil, and therefore the microorganisms will not want to come into your soil. Your soil will be dead, and that's not what you want. These organic fertilizers will enrich the soil and will be inviting to the microorganisms that are found in the soil, enriching the soil with life and vibrance, and this is what we want. Alright, so we don't buy the soil by the bags because it gets too expensive. So as you saw in our first shot in our introduction, I had a mound beside me, and that's because we get a truckload of dirt about a yard. We buy it by the yard, and it turns out to be less expensive that way. It's more economical. But now we have our wheelbarrow full. We already made some of the mixture. I want to show you how I mix all of these together. Here we have our C90. Again, this is to add the minerals into the soil. So I'm going to go ahead and add some of this into the soil. Now, normally you would add, if you're mixing it into this big wheelbarrow pile, a little bit more perhaps, depending on how rich you want to make it. I did already add some C90 before, and now I'm going to add some alfalfa meal. Again, the alfalfa meal is the nitrogen and the potassium. Alright, depending on how much nitrogen you need for your mixture will depend on how much alfalfa meal you'll add. The rock dust or the azomite for added minerals. Now, this is something that you do not want to breathe. It's very fine. And finally, your rock phosphate to complete your NPK. And then we'll mix all of these up. And once we get a good mixture, then we'll go ahead and add these to our plants, our trees, our shrubs, everything in our garden, along with our compost. And this can be done to feed our plants perhaps once a month or as needed.
So here in the wheelbarrow, we have a good mixture of the NPK fertilizers that the plants need to thrive. We have our nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And we also added C90 and azomite to provide the minerals that the plants need to grow, so that when we can eat the fruits of these plants, our bodies will also get the minerals needed for our healthy development. Now, when we add nutrients to our plants, what we do is we just move back the mulch or the wood chips from around the plants so that we can go close to the roots, and so the nutrients will be readily available and they will not be washed away by water. So this is what we're doing at this time. Just to come in a little closer, this is an Anna apple tree, and we've had several apple tree basically by separating different plants. Now, as you can see here, what Jose is doing, we have a lot of babies that are coming up around the main plant, and we don't want those necessarily in this location because they're going to compete with the main plant for nutrients. So many people will say, okay, I'm just going to cut these off and throw them away. But what we try to do is to multiply the amount of plants we have in our garden or in our yard. And so we will just separate the roots of these small plants. As you can see there, they have a lot of roots on them. We're just going to separate the roots, being careful not to damage the root of the main plant. And then we are going to plant these in pots until they're mature enough to go in ground. So that's what's being done here. So once we're able to separate a good amount that has roots on them, we're just going to put that in a bucket with water to prevent the roots from drying out. And then the limbs at the bottom that are still attached to the main plants, we're just going to cut those off. You know, we want a healthy, strong, healthy plant, and we want to determine how our plant grow. So we're going to cut off all the side shoots so that the plant will grow upward, and then we will trim it so that it's not too tall, where we can still, you know, be able to harvest and our plants will be more healthy. So as you can see, Jose using a sharp clipper, giving it a clean cut, and we will also plant those. Interesting with apple trees is that when you prune your plants, if you put the stem, remove all the leaves, put it in some soil, it will root in a matter of weeks. So that's also something you can consider when you're pruning your apple tree. So now we're going to add the fertilizer mixture around the base of our tree. And just add it all the way around so that the roots there will have food for that plant to grow healthy and strong. Now I'll just give you a bit of history about this plant. This is perhaps one of 4 or 5 Anna apple varieties that we have. However, this one is a little bit special. I believe this tree is about 3 or 4 years old. A couple years back, we went to a local big box store and I saw this plant. I didn't know it was an apple tree, but I saw it where the fruit trees were. And the person in charge of the gardening department, he was going to, it seemed as though they were taking them to bring them somewhere. So I asked, you know, is it for sale? And he said, no, they're going to throw it out because the plant was dying. It looked like it was dying because it was just a long stick. And so I asked, okay, how much would it be for you to give it to me? He said, normally, plants that are dying, they don't give it away. They just put it on the back and they send them back to the grower, or, depending on how severe the situation is, they'll toss it out. And I persisted, I encouraged, I pleaded, and I said, oh, I'll take it. And he said, I said, how much do you want for it? And he said, okay, give me $10. So I was like, $10, really? And I didn't even ask any more questions. I just took it home and we took care of it. We planted this tree using the Ellen White method. And here we have a healthy apple tree. It actually started blossoming this year. This is the third year, the second year actually since we planted this tree. And it had blossoms on it. We removed the blossoms so that the roots can grow healthy and strong. And now we have a wonderful looking an apple tree. So after we have added the nutrients to our plants, we have some compost that has been sitting for about a year. So we're going to add that also in there. Now we talk about wood chips in previous videos, that when you add, wood chips to the garden, it provides nutrients to the soil also. And we found out that to be true, because a lot of the plants that we have added wood chips to, they're not only healthy, but we don't have to water as much. They're much stronger. The colors are more vibrant, and they are also a lot more productive. So we're just gonna add a fresh supply of wood chips to this plant, and then we will just pull back the layer of mulch that was on top. And again, over the next few years, the wood chip is going to break down. The mulch on top is also going to break down to add nutrients to our plants as well.
So this idea was inspired by none other than Jesus Christ. He tells us in a parable about a fig tree. In Luke 13 verse 6, he spake also this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came and sought fruit thereon, and found none. We've been looking at this tree and it hasn't had fruit for a while. So we're coming to it, and we're wondering where is the fruit? Then the Lord gives us a remedy. He says, Then said he unto the dresser of his vineyard, Behold, these 3 years I come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and find none. Cut it down. Why cumbereth it the ground? And he answering said unto him, Lord, let it alone this year also, till I shall dig it and dung it. And if it bear fruit, well, and if not, then after that shalt thou cut it down. So the Lord has shown us that a method to be able to produce fruit is nutritious soil. And so that's what we added today. We added some nutritious soil. And likewise, this nutrition, this adding of this dung, shows us that the Lord is also giving us experiences, trials, and he is adding these trials to allow us to have fruit, to bear fruit. And so just as we were able to cut back these branches that were coming out, springing from the bottom, we're trimming this tree. The Lord also gives us that idea. And these are things that God is doing to us so that we can be fitted to enter heaven. So I pray that you and I both will meet at last in that great beyond with our Lord.
So since my husband was talking about a fig tree from the parable, we have here a fig that we also got, I think we got this last year, And we had fruit, well, 2 years ago, last year we had fruit on it. We decided not to plant it because it was producing at the time. And also the roots were going down in the ground, but because we wanted to overwinter it, we doubled up the pot. And so maybe the roots from the main plant, the main pot, is in the second pot. So I'm gonna ask him to come and help me separate it. And we are also going to add this fig to a larger pot so that we can feed it. And prayerfully, we will have a better experience next year. Wow. And sure enough, the roots of the main pot is all over this small pot. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to have to cut the root away. We're going to have to cut the pot. All right, so give us just a minute. So we weren't prepared for the amount of root that we saw in the pot at the bottom. And so we have to get a knife, and basically you separate the first pot, and we're just going to have to cut around the root. You know, try as best as possible to avoid cutting the root and basically cutting the pot apart, so that, you know, we don't have to cut the root of the plant to separate this large root system from the main plant, right? Now, once we've done that, once we have separated the top pot, we're just going to feed this plant. And so I'm going to ask Jose to come in again and to help me put some good nutrients around this plant. And you can definitely tell why it wasn't growing as it should, because it was lacking space. And even this big pot, even though it's 15 gallons, it's not going to keep this plant for much longer. So we're going to just let it stay in the pot for a couple months, and then we're going to put this fig tree in the ground. We actually have 3 fig trees. This is a green fig, and then we have 2 mission figs, and this one actually gave us the sweetest fruit. So we don't want this plant to die, and so we're going to feed it. Following the Lord's method, we'll feed it, and prayerfully it will be successful. And there we have it. We're feeding our fig tree.
Here, Mama.
Happy planting, everyone. Thank you.